How exactly does a poor country boy from a marginalized rural sect seize total, absolute control of a deeply fractured nation? And not just that, how does he bend global superpowers to his will, holding the entire Middle East hostage to his strategic patience? Well, in this explainer, we're acting as investigators. We're ripping open declassified files to uncover the ruthless, highly calculated, and dynamic geopolitical maneuvering of Syria's Hafez al Assad. We are tracking a dictator who literally treated the Middle East like a centuries-long chess match.
To really grasp this disruptive contradiction, we have to look at the sheer impossible math of his rule. Assad was born into the Alawite sect. Historically, they were a deeply marginalized group making up just 12% of Syria's population. Yet somehow, he completely iron-fistedly dominated a nation that was roughly 74% Sunni Muslim. Now you might be wondering how. He didn't just use brute military might to pull this off. He possessed this staggering, almost terrifying psychological ability to manipulate every single player around him.
To get inside his head, we're pulling back the curtain on some incredible declassified CIA intelligence from the 1980s. What it reveals is a dictator operating on a completely different timeline than the West. While American presidents were sweating over four-year election cycles, Assad viewed regional politics as an epic, centuries-long struggle. The CIA actually concluded he was deeply, profoundly patient. He was absolutely convinced that time and demographics would inevitably shift the strategic balance in favor of the Arabs.
The intelligence we've uncovered gets even more specific. One gritty, highly classified CIA dossier from 1988 explicitly states that Assad retained an almost single-handed ability to completely stall Middle East peace. He essentially held a veto over the entire region. Why? Because of an absolute, unshakable obsession with the Golan Heights. He lost his crucial strategic territory to Israel in just 6 days back in 1967 when he was defense minister. Reclaiming it wasn't just foreign policy for him, it was the very foundation of his political legitimacy.
Now, looking impartially at the facts, his survival at home was a dark masterclass in Machiavellian control. He played both sides seamlessly. On one hand, he co-opted Sunni clerics, heavily funding their mosques, but on the other hand, he quietly stacked the military and intelligence services with fiercely loyal Alawite tribesmen. And when he was challenged, the response was apocalyptic. In 1982, he unleashed elite forces, utilizing his brother Rafat to brutally crush a Muslim Brotherhood uprising in Hama, killing thousands. The message was unmistakable: resistance equals annihilation.
But here's where his incredible dynamic agility on the world stage really comes into play. Think about this dizzying trajectory. From seizing absolute power in 1970 to secretly coordinating a massive surprise war with Egypt in 1973, to suddenly shifting his military machine right into the chaos of the Lebanese Civil War in 1976, Assad was a geopolitical shapeshifter. He constantly, ruthlessly rotated his alliances, treating regional powers like literal pawns to make sure that all roads in the Middle East led directly through Damascus.
Piecing together these declassified assessments, a really fascinating, somewhat rigid psychological profile emerges. The CIA constantly noted his tactical flexibility. Sure, he would negotiate, but within very rigid limits. He harbored this visceral, deeply ingrained animosity toward the Jewish state. He'd frequently cite religious texts to foreign diplomats, constantly, and incorrectly, insisting that Israel harbored limitless biblical ambitions to expand all the way from the Nile to the Euphrates. This specific intelligence analysis captures his mindset so perfectly. Assad would actually, publicly, compare modern Israel to the medieval crusaders. In his speeches, he'd remind Syrians that Arabs fought the European crusaders for 200 years before finally expelling them. His logic was chillingly patient. If we outlasted the global superpowers of the Middle Ages, why can't we outlast our modern geopolitical enemies? To Assad, time wasn't just a factor. Time itself was a weapon.
But listen, don't mistake his patience for ideological stubbornness, because his pragmatism was astonishing. For decades, the Soviet Union was his ultimate patron, flooding his country with weapons. But when the Eastern Bloc collapsed, Assad suddenly faced total isolation. Without skipping a single beat, this fierce anti-imperialist flipped the script completely. When his hated Ba'athist rival Saddam Hussein invaded Kuwait in 1990, Assad shocked the globe. He joined the American-led coalition, sending Syrian troops to fight alongside the U.S. just to secure a seat at the table.
But even as he sat at that negotiating table with the West throughout the 90s, he harbored a deep, almost suffocating paranoia. Declassified files expose his intense suspicion of American step-by-step peace proposals. To Assad, this entire diplomatic process was just an elaborate trap, a trap designed to divide the Arabs, lock in Israel's military dominance, and leave Syria completely isolated. He absolutely refused to give an inch without a guaranteed, upfront picture of the final outcome.
So this paralyzing suspicion finally climaxes in March 2000 at the fateful Geneva summit with President Bill Clinton. Assad is elderly, he's frail, he's totally obsessed with his legacy and securing his son's succession. Yet, hunched over a map, he was immovable. The entire peace process collapsed over a geographic impasse, a strip of land literally yards wide. Assad rigidly demanded the exact June 1967 borders, which would place Syrian territory right on the shoreline of the Sea of Galilee. He wouldn't compromise a single drop of water.
History always gives us two starkly different views of a failure like this, and as investigators, it's vital we look at both impartially. On one side, American negotiators like Ambassador Martin Indyk viewed Assad as an impossible, stubborn figure who used brinkmanship and cynicism to dodge peace. But if you read the memoirs of Syrian Vice President Farouk al-Shara, he argues the exact opposite. Shara claims the whole process was a rigged game, exposing the U.S. as a biased mediator that constantly prioritized Israeli constraints over Syrian sovereign rights.
Exposing an even darker layer of his strategy, the files show Assad didn't just fight Israel, he waged brutal, calculated proxy wars against his own Arab neighbors. CIA documentation heavily tracks his violent, long-standing animosity with PLO leader Yasser Arafat. To keep a total monopoly on the Arab-Israeli conflict, Assad literally backed proxy militias in Lebanon to slaughter Arafat's loyalists. He deliberately kneecapped the Palestinian movement just to ensure they remained entirely dependent on Damascus.
So, when those Arab neighbors finally circumvented him, with Arafat signing the secret 1993 Oslo Accords and Jordan signing a peace treaty in 1994, Assad's fury was absolute. He felt deeply betrayed. He viewed any separate unilateral deals with Israel as capitulations, agreements of submission that completely shattered Arab unity. In his mind, if the Arabs didn't negotiate as a single unified bloc commanded by his regime, they were simply surrendering.
But, while he played this grand, sweeping geopolitical chess game abroad, things at home were decaying. Internally, the socialist ideals of the Ba'ath Party had totally rotten into a corrupt, crony-capitalist state. This vast sectarian favoritism and elite corruption, it was heavily masked behind a state-sponsored, quasi-divine cult of personality. Massive stylized posters of Assad, sometimes even depicting him with halo-like imagery, blanketed the entire country, projecting a suffocating illusion of total national consensus.
To wrap up this explainer, we have to ask a really dark, lingering question, especially when we look at the ruin we see today. Hafez al Assad achieved his ultimate goal, right? He survived for 3 decades, he dominated the region, and he successfully passed absolute power to his son, Bashar. But at what cost? Did this master manipulator actually build a stable nation? Or, by relying on sectarian fear, corruption, and massive suppression, did he simply hand his son a poisoned chalice that was always destined to shatter?